We're just a few weeks into the new White House administration, and already Donald Trump is making good on his promises to gut US federal agencies and apply tariffs against Mexico, China and Canada, although there is a negotiation around them. The EU is bracing itself to see what's next. For the Europe conversation, I catch up with two experts who say the only people profiting from these actions are adversaries of the West. David Salvo and Rachel Dean Wilson, both co-directors of the Alliance for Securing Democracy at the German Marshall Fund. David, you're an expert in Russia, and Rachel, an expert in US policy. Thanks very much for joining us on the Europe conversation. Rachel, can I start with you and ask you a little bit about tariffs? We have a wait-and-see policy in Brussels at the European Commission at the moment. Of course, there is preparations for the very likelihood that tariffs will materialise. What do you recommend? What would your advice be to the EU in relation to that? And what are the purpose of the tariffs, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would look at what's going on now with tariffs, right? Look at kind of the opening bid with Canada, Mexico, and China, and how that went for pointers for Europe on how to maybe negotiate and address this. Negotiate being the key word here. I think if we know anything about Donald Trump, it's about a deal. And so you should view kind of the opening tariff discussion as an opening discussion of a deal.
And what do you think the point is for Donald Trump to apply tariffs, given that there is a strong consensus that really this will impact Americans the most?
It is a tool that he has expressed great love for. And I think it's something tangible that it's easy for him to explain, and that is easy to put out there as a starting negotiating tactic. I can't make the economic case for tariffs, and I'm not an economist, but I don't think I could if I tried anyway. But I do think it is, from a messaging perspective, an effective tool for him.
Is the message also Donald Trump saying to the European Union, we're not allies in the way that we have been in the past, that basically separating the two sides?
I wouldn't go that far. I think we all understand that the president has certain views on what an alliance means. We saw this in his first administration with the notion of collective defense and the need for European allies to spend more of their budget on NATO and defense. I don't think necessarily that tariffs are a signal that he doesn't care about the alliance himself. Now, I know Europeans are probably taking it that way, and I understand. So I'm not going to tell them not to take this personally.
And I suppose, tariffs, they really pale into insignificance when it comes to the existential crisis on the continent of Europe now, the war in Ukraine, Russian interference, and so on. Where do you think Trump's mind is at when it comes to that, protecting allies, being there shoulder to shoulder?
I think Trump would love for the war to go away tomorrow. I think there's no utility in war raging in Ukraine for the United States. That full stop. He also thinks that the war in Ukraine is first and foremost Europe's responsibility. That doesn't mean that the United States is going to immediately abdicate any sort of responsibility for supporting Ukraine. And in fact, there are signals that there are back-channel discussions with Russia to see just how serious Russia is about negotiating.
I think that message is probably being heard loud and clear at this stage. But what would that look like to you? Because, a lot of people are saying there's no way that Ukraine will not be occupied to some degree, particularly in the east, Crimea and so on, that there may be some sort of frozen territory there, and then potentially security guarantees for unoccupied territories of Ukraine. But what do you think that the United States might want to extract from that? Because we've heard the conversation around raw minerals and what Ukraine might be able to provide for the United States.
I think you just identified it. I don't believe that the administration sees much beyond that in terms of what Ukraine can provide the American people or the American interests. Trump himself has said many times, like, what do we care about Ukraine? Who cares? This is not in our immediate interests. But there are real economic and technological and all sorts of derivatives of like the raw material that Ukraine has that is probably at the forefront of the administration's thinking. Now, I also think that war is bad for business in many respects too. And if we want to have sort of a Europe whole, free, and at peace with a trade relationship that is beneficial in both directions, it's probably not advantageous for there to be, a years-long war raging on the continent too.
Rachel, looking at the administration so far, there's been huge, I think people are quite shocked at what's happened in relation to staff at the FBI, the CIA, the Treasury, people's private information being handed over to people associated with Elon Musk, who is an unelected official. I mean, what does this mean in terms of the implications for citizens of the United States, the security of the United States, privacy, and so on?
We are still figuring out what it means. But the bottom line is Elon Musk has this special status, and so he can work a little outside of the government by also being associated with it. I think there have been already some lines that he has gone up to or crossed. There's discussion of lawsuits from different federal employees around some of the actions that have been taken. And that's one of the really interesting things about this period of time is that we are seeing a lot of these questions are going to be playing out in the courts. And so we've seen the Trump administration, the Department of Government Efficiency, this outside department that Musk is heading, and inside the Trump administration through executive action and executive orders, really testing the bound of executive power.
Rachel, I want to ask you about USAID. Elon Musk said he's putting it through the woodcutter. It's one of the most important organizations globally when it comes to the United States because it helps people in poverty, in war zones, in natural disasters, whether it's global warming, whether it's the Haitian earthquake, and he wants to end it all.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. It's one of those situations where they just brought a hammer to something that we kind of need a chisel for. There is an overwhelming feeling that there's bloat in the federal government. I think that's true. I think you could go through any agency and pick out programs that don't need to be there, that like we should not be spending taxpayer money on. In fact, in one of my previous jobs on the Hill, we would do a pork barrel spending report, right? And it was to go through to identify somewhat ridiculous projects that the federal government was funding. So this has long been just kind of a byproduct of a large government. So I think there is a reasonable desire to cut back on these government agencies. That's not, we've just seen a whole halting of something like USAID where there are, as you said, very important programs for everyone around the world that are coming out of that agency.
But you have Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, depriving the poorest people of the world, people who are starving, homeless, suffering, whether it's climate change or natural disasters or war, stealing money and food out of their mouths.
Yeah, I can't. I don't know. I can't speak for Elon Musk, but I do know that one of the most popular things that Trump is doing, in a general sense, again, I think if you go deep on any one of these policies, you get more resistance and pushback. But in a general sense, it is very popular to cut down on the size of the U.S. government.
What's unfortunate from a moral standpoint is that there are these humanitarian programs that have had long-standing bipartisan support in the United States. And I think if you told most American citizens that, we have a tiny fraction of the U.S. federal budget that is going to supporting HIV and AIDS health programs in Africa, or providing food and clean water in real conflict zones, I don't think you would get much opposition to that. And that's why Republicans and Democrats have long supported this in Congress, right? And administrations of both parties. So from a moral standpoint, this is obviously horrible. From a practical, sort of pragmatic standpoint too, this is just abdicating American leadership all over the world. So if the Trump administration's view is we want to lead peace we want to achieve peace through strength, this is not the way to do it. What we're doing is we're alienating people. We're opening the doors to America's adversaries to fill in these leadership vacuums all over the world, in Latin America, in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia. Like it's in Africa. China and Russia are the ultimate benefactors of this policy, not the American people.
And just on the Russia, because you're obviously an expert on Russia, the problem with the CIA and the FBI laying people off and sort of diminishing their roles and degrading them in lots of ways, the way they say, it appears that, the Trump administration, some of them they may be in government, but they still somehow are attacking government or agencies of the government. But What are the implications for security of the United States with Russia that has already been interfering not just in America but all across Europe and all across the world?
I mean, this sort of instability in American institutions, this sort of chaos, it's exactly what Russia wants, and it's exactly what they exploit to amplify discord, to amplify polarization, to attack American leadership. Like this only plays to Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping's advantage. It's what they want. They want democratic instability. They want a weak, distracted, internal turmoil in the United States, specifically because it means we take our eye off the ball on our global responsibilities, and Russia and China can prey on that.
And David, final question to you. We're talking about how Vladimir Putin is probably happy with the situation with, I suppose, Donald Trump in the United States, reverting or becoming more isolationist in some ways. But the relations between the EU and America are also going to make him happy, because there's nothing worse than the West being at loggerheads right now.
You said it. I mean, if an alliance is divided, that plays to Russia's advantage. I mean, Vladimir Putin wants a divided alliance because it opens the door for Russian, more like-minded parties and politicians in Europe sort of wondering, well, if we can't get along with the United States, why don't we turn east again? Like, why don't we get Russian energy back here? Why don't we remove sanctions on Russia and have more normalized economic relations? We can't trust the United States anymore. That's exactly what Vladimir Putin wants.
Okay, David Salvo and Rachel Dean Wilson from the German Marshall Fund, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.